Hello there, this is Monica Reinagel, and you're listening to the Nutrition Diva podcast. Welcome. I recently got an email from Georgia. She's a longtime listener of the Nutrition Diva podcast, and she was writing to ask me about an ingredient that she'd run across called Zynamite. I follow several people on social media for inspiration, she writes, and one of them is Superman himself, Henry Cavill. Now, for the uninitiated, Cavill plays the role of Clark Kent and his alter ego Superman in the movie Man of Steel. He is, as the kids say, ripped. Recently, she continues, he discussed his supplement regimen, and one of them has an ingredient that I never heard of before, Zynamite. What is that? I'm not a bodybuilder like he is, she says, but do I need it? And can I get Zynamite in my regular food? Well, you know what, Georgia? I'd never heard of Zynamite either, but here's what I found out. Zynamite is the trade name for a mango extract, but this isn't just any old mango juice. It's extracted from the leaves of the plant through a proprietary patented process that promises a certain concentration of a polyphenol called mangiferin. So no, this really isn't something that you could get from your diet unless you were planning to chew a lot of mango leaves. It's marketed to supplement manufacturers primarily as an ingredient that they can add to formulations that are designed to enhance brain function and sports performance. According to the manufacturer, Zynamite is an all-natural, evidence-based, nootropic, and sports performance ingredient supported by 7 clinical studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. So here are just a few of the purported benefits. Faster reaction time, increased calculation performance, decreased fatigue during exercise, increased muscle power when fatigued, and faster recovery. So that is quite a list. Why don't we take a look at all of this evidence? One of these published clinical studies is actually a toxicology study. And good news, it's not toxic. Another one is a very preliminary study in rats. Let's bracket that one too. That leaves 5 human studies, but only one of those tested the effects of Zynamite on its own. So let's start with that one. A single large dose of Zynamite led to a small but statistically significant improvement in the scores on cognitive tests, standardized tests that test attention and recall. For example, those who were taking the placebo in this trial scored about 62.5% accuracy on one of these tests, while those taking Zynamite scored just under 64%. So you're probably not going to ace your LSATs on the strength of this ingredient alone. Some studying will still be required. The other studies all tested the effects of Zynamite on various aspects of athletic performance. But again, all of these looked at Zynamite in combination with other ingredients such as quercetin or luteolin. The longest of these studies lasted 15 days, but the majority of them were single-dose studies, so they were looking at the acute effects, and more on that in just a moment. And all of these studies were relatively small, few dozen subjects, and these subjects were basically young, physically active men and women. And they observed that Zynamite, again, in combination with these other polyphenols, allowed athletes who had exercised to the point of exhaustion to eke out just a little bit more effort. And it also seemed to reduce muscle soreness and enhance their recovery. The differences between the test groups and the control groups were relatively small and often didn't reach the level of statistical significance. So what can you reasonably expect Zynamite to do for your physique? Well, if you are looking for that tiny edge that might push you over the finish line 1/10 of a second ahead of your competitor, Zynamite could possibly be part of that edge. Or it might have been the luteolin or the quercetin. It's a little hard to say. But if you were hoping to get the same effects that were documented in these studies, then you'd probably want to take the same combination of nutrients and in similar doses. So, for example, the product that Georgia specifically asked me about contains only 1/3 to 1/10 as much as was used in these studies. These preliminary studies also don't tell us whether these modest performance-enhancing effects would continue with sustained use. Caffeine, for example, is another very well-documented performance-enhancing drug. However, it becomes a little bit less effective with ongoing use because our bodies acclimate to its effects. So if you want to get the maximum boost from caffeine, you have to stop using it for a period of time before your big race day. Zynamite is not a stimulant like caffeine, and so it presumably works through different pathways. The effects are more likely due to the antioxidant and the anti-inflammatory properties that are seen to various degrees with most polyphenols. But I'd still be curious to know whether the effects seen in these studies would be sustained with ongoing use. If you were using this to give you an edge in competition, you'd probably want to know that. But of course, Georgia wasn't asking about using Zynamite in competition. She just wondered whether it might allow her to get a bit more payoff from her usual weightlifting routines. In somebody who's training their body as a full-time job, this kind of performance nutrition might add an incremental advantage. I think it might be harder to detect the effects in a more casual exerciser. But you know what? There's always that old placebo effect. Would taking this supplement help you dig just a bit deeper or push yourself a bit harder when you work out simply because you believe you've got a little something extra in the tank? Maybe. And would that translate into noticeable improvements in your results? Quite possibly. Now, I don't know about you, Georgia, but personally, I don't think I'd want to experience the quote-unquote shirt-splitting pumps that are promised by some of the advertising. Fortunately for my shirts, I'm pretty sure that Henry Cavill's Superman physique owes a lot more to genetics and training than to this ingredient or any of the other supplements that he promotes. But if you do decide to give it a try, be sure and let us know what happens. But just to be on the safe side, maybe don't wear your favorite workout shirt that day. This is Monica Reinagel, the Nutrition Diva. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com or leave me a voicemail at 443-961-6206. I always love to hear from you. And if you enjoy this podcast, I hope you'll also check out my other podcast with Brock Armstrong. It's called The Change Academy. And in that show, we talk all about what it takes to create and sustain positive behavior change. It's a lot of fun. The Nutrition Diva Show is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. It's audio engineered by Nathan Sems with script editing by Adam Cecil. Our operations and editorial manager is Michelle Margulis. Our assistant manager is Emily Miller. And our marketing and publicity assistant is Davina Tomlin. Our intern is Jake Johnson. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.